The Federal Communications Commission is launching an investigation into The View, which means in a pretty short order of time, you can anticipate that they may be going just bye-bye the way of Jimmy Kimmel. And before everybody freaks out and says, oh my gosh, this is the end of free speech, etc., I'm here to tell you, no, it's not, because The View is actually held to a different standard, believe it or not, than, say, Rachel Maddow over on MSNBC, or even Joy Reid was over on MSNBC, or Sean Hannity is on Fox News. Totally different standards, because one is broadcast and one is cable. And you can go all the way back to the 1934 Communications Act to see how this one all works out. Anyway, let's go straight to Brendan Carr, who's head of the FCC. Here he is speaking with Scott Jennings on his radio show saying, yeah, we're looking into The View. We're going to launch an investigation into The View. And the reason they're going to do this is because what they have discovered is that all those local affiliates all around the country, they don't like The View any more than they like Jimmy Kimmel. Listen.
Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers at NBC. Just wondering, do you have comments on those shows? And are they doing what Kimmel did Monday night? And is it even worse on those programs, in your opinion?
Well, if you can be unfunny, that's fine. And a lot of people are sort of saying that, well, people are punishing Kimmel because they don't like a joke that he told. But, you know, we don't need to rehash it here. But obviously what he said was not a joke. It wasn't presented at all that way. But when you look at these other TV shows, what's interesting is the FCC does have a rule called the equal opportunity rule, which means, for instance, if you're in the run-up to an election, you have one, partisan elected official on, you have to give equal time, equal opportunity to the opposing partisan politician. So far, so good. But there's an exception to that rule called the bona fide news exception, which means if you are a bona fide news program, you don't have to abide by the equal opportunity rule. And over the years, the FCC has developed a body of case law on that and has suggested that most of these late night shows, other than SNL, are bona fide news programs. And potentially, I would assume you could make the argument that The View is a bona fide news show. But I'm not so sure about that. And I think it's worthwhile to have the FCC look into whether The View and some of these other programs that you have still qualify as bona fide news programs and therefore exempt from the equal opportunity regime that Congress has put in place.
Got about 30 seconds.
You hear that? So what they're looking at is whether or not The View actually falls under basically existing legislation going all the way back to 1934, in that you have a responsibility to your community. Because, right, this programming is coming into the homes of all these communities all across America to be of public service in some way, shape, or form. And so if you're a news program, you have to be part of that public service. If you're a broadcast program, you're part of that public service. That's what it was designed for. Now, cable, totally different story. Right? They could go take The View and they could go put it on MSNBC and they could run that all day long. Of course, that's partly why MSNBC is being spun off, don't forget, from Comcast and NBC, because they don't want the network, which is governed by the FCC, to have any taint to it or stink around it as a result of MSNBC. But for whatever reason, you had Jimmy Kimmel thinking he was Greg Gutfeld, right? The liberal version of Greg Gutfeld over on broadcast television. That can't happen. That can't exist. That actually is something that would be against federal law. And this is why this new head of the FCC, Brendan Carr, is taking this so seriously. I mean, think about the misinformation that has been put out there over and over and over and over again, to the point where they had to read these, quote, legal notes, right? Because it's just flat out wrong facts that they were putting on The View day in, day out. Oh, there was that time that Whoopi said they're going to be deporting all the gays, all the non-whites. I mean, crazy talk, right? And yet this is treated like it's gospel. This is what's coming into your home. This is what is being piped in over federal airwaves.
All of you. Talking about you, it's us. He's not going to say, oh, you're with a white guy, I'm going to keep you from being deported. No, he's going to deport you and put the white guy with someone else. The man is out there. He's also...
He's out there. Oh, he's out there, all right. You know what? Did you notice that they didn't say anything about Jimmy Kimmel yesterday after the news had come down? They were absolutely silent. I think they're a little bit scared, just a teeny tiny bit right now on The View, as they should be. But the big news coming their way is that the FCC is confirming they're looking at launching an investigation into The View. This comes as they launch already an investigation into Disney and to ABC for its DEI practices. This comes amid multiple warnings from one Brendan Carr for none other than ABC, specifically that network and specifically that show. So, they don't seem to be able to take a hint, but don't forget what Brendan Carr told Fox, maybe this is about a month and a half ago. Watch.
And this is what they said. Joy Behar is an irrelevant loser suffering from a severe case of Trump derangement syndrome. It's no surprise that The View's ratings hit an all-time low last year. She should self-reflect on her own jealousy of President Trump's historic popularity before her show is the next to be pulled off air, end quote. Is The View now in the crosshairs of this administration?
Look, it's entirely possible that there's issues over there. I mean, again, stepping back, this broader dynamic, once President Trump has exposed these media gatekeepers and smashed this facade, there's a lot of consequences. I think the consequences of that aren't quite finished. And look, The View's got a lot of challenges there. It wasn't that long ago, I think one episode, one show alone, they had to stop, interrupt the show, and read 4 separate legal notices to try to avoid legal liability. So I'm not surprised to hear people saying that their ratings are struggling.
Well, sir, where does this end then?
Look, I think we need a course correction. It's time for America's legacy broadcasters to return to promoting the public interest. And just recently, Skydance, which is looking to acquire CBS, wrote letters to the FCC committing to serious change, to trying to root out bias, to putting in place an ombudsman that would address these issues, to returning to unbiased, trustworthy journalism. That's where we have to go. And I think we're getting some wins along the way. It's trust but verify at the end of the day. We're not where we need to go. But I think this legacy media really needs to reorient, or they're going to continue to run into issues like Colbert, where it just doesn't make economic sense to run a partisan circus.
Okay, so there's the economic argument, right? You're just not making that much money. Colbert was draining them of something like $40 million a year over at CBS. And then there's the partisan circus, which keeps coming up over and over again. And then there's this sort of, public duty that you've completely ignored. I got to tell you, so I used to work in network news, and I had worked for CBS Evening News, and I also worked for NBC Nightly News, but this was like years ago. This is pre-Trump. It's like there's a real big distinction, pre and post-Trump. And I can assure you that one of my goals always when I was on the air at those networks was, I may have had my thoughts on a particular story, but I did try and put that aside. And I would very religiously try to make sure we always had both sides, right, in the story. So I remember being very conflicted with this once when I went to cover the Duke. Remember the Duke lacrosse story? And I just had this instinct that those kids were innocent. And I'm like, oh gosh, how do I? And still I was careful. I was careful to give both sides. Why? Because you know what? The FCC actually looks at that stuff, or it used to back in the day. And for whatever reason, after Donald Trump got elected, everything became chaotic. I remember going to cable for the first time at CNBC and being like, woo, I'm home free. This is fantastic. I can actually give a little bit more of a viewpoint. You could because you weren't governed by the same set of rules. You were no longer on the public airwaves. Totally different business. And hey, over here, it's like one big party. I get to say whatever I want to say now, don't I? We have a good time, do we not? I mean, we're over 1 million subs. I'm going to wait on the party. We'll have a big party next week, but out of respect for my former colleague and friend, Charlie Kirk, who has a big funeral coming up this weekend, of course, I kind of want to hold off on that. But anyway, it's remarkable what we've been able to accomplish here. But we don't, of course, have the same rules governing us as the broadcast channels do. Again, remember, big difference. Okay, you've got the Communications Act in 1934 that says, hey, you have to have some obligation, right, to the community. They also have what's known as the Fairness Act in terms of, Equal Time Act. So you've got to give everyone equal time. So if Kamala Harris is going to get 3 minutes on the evening news, well, then guess what? Donald Trump's going to get 3 minutes on the evening news. The only problem is, it's 3 minutes of how much we love Kamala, how she's the greatest thing in the world since sliced bread. And then it's, we hate Trump, we hate Trump, we hate Trump. And so what has happened is the American people have lost trust and faith in these news organizations. You see that, of course, reflected in the ratings. But in terms of where the regulation comes in and whether or not this is restricting speech, the answer is no, it's not restricting speech. Jimmy Kimmel can go take his show over to MSNBC or over here to Streamingville, and he can do that all day long, every day of the week without a problem. But when it comes to broadcast news, you cannot do what Jimmy Kimmel did.